Hello, students. Today we are going to study the second chapter of your English reader textbook, which is Simon Says. So, this is a very interesting story. The story is about the author, his grandfather, and his guide dog Simon. So, before we start the story, does anyone have any pets? Okay, so the students who have any pets, do your pets help you in some or another way? Some pets do, right? As you can see on the screen, this is a dog. It's not a normal dog, it's called a guide dog. So, why this dog is called a guide dog? Because, as its name suggests, guide dogs guides the people who cannot hear or who cannot walk properly or people who cannot see, right? So, the dogs help them. That's why the dogs are called guide dogs. So, this is your chapter number 2, Simon Says. So, as you can see on the screen, you can see dogs, you can see horses, camels, reindeers, bullocks, right? So, what in these pictures, what do you have in common? All these animals are helping human beings, right? The dogs are carrying the sledge, the horse is carrying the carriage, the camel he picks up weights in people, bulls they help in farming, reindeers also help in sledges. Okay, so let's begin the story. There are three main characters. The one is author, second grandfather, and the dog Simon. This story is written by Cheryl Rao. Okay, so he's the author. First, read the story about a guide dog named Simon. Let's read the story. I begin to get the feeling that Christmas is around the corner when Ma starts making sweets and the smell of burnt sugar baking fills the house. The countdown begins, and every day there is some new activity going on, like the Christmas tree lights being checked out, the writing of the stars to be fixed, or the last minute chopping of the dry fruits to be done. Then, before we know what is happening, we start our rounds of carol singing, meeting old friends, and making new ones. Oh, the entire month is fun. So, as you can see in the first paragraph, I means the author. The author is telling us the story. Okay, so the environment is of Christmas. Okay, as we previously saw in cookies, Santa and cookies. Ma is baking cookies. Ma is the author's mom. They're baking the cookies, they are decorating the Christmas lights, Christmas trees, they're making tasty, tasty food, chopping dry fruits. What is carol singing? Carol singing is the songs which we sing on Christmas, which are about Christmas. Okay, so the whole environment is of fun, everyone is having fun. The Christmas is about to begin in a few days. But what happens? There is a bad news. Okay, this year, however, was different. Early in the morning, on the 1st of December, my mother woke me up with an awful news. I have to go to hospital, Rita, she said worriedly. Why? I asked. Grandpa has had a terrible accident. Okay, so the mom, she gets a very bad message that the grandpa has been into an accident, so he's very badly injured and he's in the hospital. So grandpa is my favorite person in the world after my friend Latika. I can tell him anything, even grumble. When I think Ma is being unfair to me, he always listens and gives me his fullest attention, like I am an adult. Simon does too, but that is different. So, Rita. Rita is the author of this story. Okay, grandpa is her favorite person. Okay, so after Rita's friend Latika, grandpa is her favorite person. Okay, he always listens to her even when her mom is complaining, which is grumble. Grumble means complaining. When Rita's mom is complaining a lot, so grandpa always takes Rita's side. So grandpa and Rita are like best friends. So when grandpa began to lose his eyesight some years ago, he got himself a guide dog. As we explained, a guide dog is a dog which helps us in seeing or doing other activities. A trained German shepherd, and called him Simon. Because I have to do what Simon says, he told me when I asked him why he chose Simon. Then he told me about a game he used to play when he was a little boy called Simon Says. Because of Simon, Grandpa could continue to live on his own. He could go for walks and even do some shopping now and then when he wanted to surprise us with gifts. So, students, as we become very old, so there are some medical disabilities we get. Sometimes we lose our eyesight. What does that mean? That means we cannot see very well from our eyes. Some old people, they lose their ear sight. That means they cannot hear very properly. So, in this case, Grandpa was getting very old. So, he lost his eyesight. He couldn't see very properly. So, because of that, he got himself a dog called Simon. So, there is a game, students, okay? So, there is a game called Simon Says. So, the game is like one person will tell you to jump, okay? So, the other jumps. Okay, if someone tells you to bark, you will bark. It's a very fun game called Simon Says. So grandpa used to play this game when he was a little boy, so that's why he named his dog Simon. He was a trained German shepherd. Okay, that means he was a German shepherd. That means the breed of the dog, the type of the dog was a German shepherd, and he was very well trained. That means he went through a lot of training. He can guide people. So when grandpa couldn't see, Simon used to guide him. That means he used to help him. If grandpa couldn't see, he can bark. So grandpa could walk around freely even though he couldn't see much. So, because of Simon, Grandpa could walk, he could go for shopping. Okay, so Simon was a very, very good dog. Simon led Grandpa straight into the path of a car and he was badly injured. My mother said that evening he was awake when I went, but he just kept calling out Simon's name. So, what happened? So, as Simon used to guide Grandpa on the roads, by mistake, Simon led Grandpa onto the road. That means, by mistake, Santa took Grandpa on the road and Grandpa got into a very terrible accident. Okay? Ma had brought Simon back to our place, but he just mopped around the house, barely eating or drinking. It was as if he knew he was responsible for Grandpa's condition. That night, Simon didn't sleep at all. After that, he just got worse. I took him out for walks, talked to him, and told him we are praying for Grandpa's recovery. So Simon was very, very sad. So when the author Rita, she took Simon to her house, Simon just mopped around. That means moved around very unhappily. He thought grandpa is hurt because of him. So he felt very guilty. So he felt very responsible for grandpa's condition. That because of me, grandpa is very hurt. So Simon couldn't walk or sleep at all. Okay, he just got worse. He couldn't eat. He left eating. He stopped drinking, and Rita was trying very hard to tell Simon that the whole family is praying for Grandpa's recovery. It was a couple of days later, when I returned from school, that I made the discovery Simon was sitting on the porch in front of the mesh door, but he didn't react to the sound of the rickshaw when I got home. He did not reply to me when I called out to him. He just continued to stare straight ahead at Ma, who was in the kitchen. So when Rita returned from school, that she discovered, that means she found out that Simon was sitting on the porch. Porch means covered entrance. We have porches outside our houses, right? So he was sitting on the porch outside a mesh door. That means the door which is made out of wires. We have those doors to protect us from mosquitoes, right? So those are mesh doors. He did not react to the sound of rickshaw when Rita got home, and he did not reply to Rita when she tried to talk to him. Okay, he is just staring his mother, Rita's mother, and she's in kitchen. Simon, Simon, I called loudly. Finally, he turned his head, stood up, and trotted towards me, wiggling his tail, a big doggy smile on his face. Okay, so the when Rita called him very loudly, Simon, Simon, okay, then he realized that Rita has come from school, and he trotted. What does trotted means? Walk very fast towards Rita, wagging his doggy tail. Okay, so Rita realized that Simon is deaf. That means he couldn't hear from his ears. He's deaf, Ma, I said when I walked into the kitchen. That was why he led Grandpa into the path of that vehicle. He couldn't hear it approaching. So Rita realized that Simon was going deaf. He was 10 years old, right? So he was very old in doggy years. As Grandpa lost his eyesight, Simon lost his ear sight. Okay, he went deaf. That is why he couldn't hear the vehicle which hit Grandpa, because he couldn't hear it. Ma stopped cooking and thought for a minute. He must be almost 10 years old now, she said, wiping her hands on a cloth. So it's possible his hearing is going. That means Simon is going deaf. Simon still wasn't eating, and the next morning, when I took him for a walk, his legs gave way and he sat down heavily on the grass. So Simon was still very upset and sad because Grandpa was not there, and he still felt guilty that because of Simon, Grandpa was hurt. So Rita tried her very best to cheer him up. So Rita took Simon for a walk in the garden, and his legs gave way. Okay, so what does that mean? That means his legs got very weak. Okay, and he sat down heavily on the grass. So he just sat down on the grass. Ma, Ma, I shouted as I tried to lift him up. Come quick, Simon can't walk. Ma helped me pick Simon up, and we took him to the vet. Simon was running a fever and was severely dehydrated, so he was put on a drip immediately. I stayed with him until he was settled, and for the next few days spent as much time as I could with him as he fought for life. So Simon was not eating and drinking, right? Because he was very sad. So that is why Simon got very weak. So Ma and Rita took him to the vet. So what is a vet? Vet is a doctor for animals, okay? So the vet found out that Simon had a fever. That means he was very hot and he was severely dehydrated. That means very dehydrated. Dehydrated means when there is less water in our body. When you play in the sun a lot in the summer, what happens? You become very dehydrated, right? That is what happened to Simon. So the vet got him a saline, okay? Saline, that means a drip, okay? So the vet put saline on Simon. It was a week before I could visit Grandpa again. He looked so frail and weak and was bandaged all over. He looked at me as I held his hand and whispered, "Get me out of here. How is Simon?" I found it hard to speak about Simon, but he seemed to read my mind. It will do good to him to meet me. He must feel like I've deserted him. Then Grandpa told me how much he longed to be home, how he hated being in the hospital. So, after 7 days, after 1 week, Rita could visit Grandpa again in the hospital. He looked very pale, very frail, and weak. He was very tired, right? He was just in an accident and was bandaged all over. There were bandages all over Grandpa. He looked at me as I held his hand. Okay, so Grandpa looked at Rita and told her to get him out of the hospital. And he cared very dearly about Simon. He missed Simon. He thought that Simon would have thought that Grandpa had deserted him. That means Grandpa just left him. Because of Simon, Grandpa went into an accident. So Grandpa thought that Simon must be thinking that Grandpa is very angry on him and he has just left him. Okay? So he asked Rita, "How is Simon?" Okay? Then Grandpa told me for how much he longed to be home. That means how much Grandpa missed home. It took Ma 2 weeks to convince the doctors to let Grandpa come home with us. By then, Simon was back at home. When he realized that Grandpa was back too, Simon rose shakily to his feet and began to bark. So, after 2 weeks, Ma, Rita's mother, she convinced doctors to let Grandpa go home because Grandpa missed home and he missed Simon. So, after 2 weeks, they went home. When Simon realized Grandpa was back, he got very excited. Simon was very weak, right? Simon stood up shakily. That means he is very shaky. Yeah? He is shivering. But he still stood up very shakingly to his feet and began to bark, almost trying to dance around, getting under our feet as he helped Grandpa get into a chair. The attendant who brought Grandpa home the hospital told me, "Keep the dog away. He'll jump on the old man and hurt him." But Grandpa put up his hand and said hoarsely, "Simon is too smart to do that." So, even when Simon was very weak, he couldn't walk, he was dehydrated, When Grandpa came, he was very excited. Even though he was weak, he helped Grandpa get into his chair. Simon was such a nice guide dog. He was very kind. So, the attendant from the hospital, that means the person who helps in the hospital, who brought Grandpa home, he shouted at the dog. He thought the Simon would hurt Grandpa, okay, because he was all broken, okay, because of the accident. But Grandpa very angrily and hoarsely means sounding rough and very harsh, almost rude. He said to the attendant, Simon is too smart to do that. That means Simon is a very smart dog. He could not hurt Grandpa. There were only a few days left before Christmas, and we had to look after two patients in the house now as we finished our preparations. But as days passed, both made a slow and steady recovery. On Christmas Eve, I found Grandpa clicking off his mobile phone. So, the Christmas was just around the corner, right? So, as Grandpa is a patient, and even Simon is a patient, Rita and Rita's family had to look after both of them. So, as the days passed, as the days went by, Simon and Grandpa made a full recovery. That means slowly and steady they were getting healthier, they were getting better. I thought we were pals. Why didn't you tell me how ill Simon was? Grandpa had obviously been checking with the vet as well as talking to Ma. So Rita never told Grandpa that Simon was sick. So Grandpa told her, I thought we were pals. That means I thought we were friends. Why didn't you tell me about Simon? But Rita forgot that that Grandpa was in touch with the vet, that means Simon's doctor, and Ma, and he knew everything about Simon. I didn't say anything. The next morning, after picking up the presents from below the hastily decorated Christmas tree, I found Grandpa's bed empty and Simon nowhere in sight. I was rushing out to the room to inform Ma when Grandpa walked in unsteadily from the veranda led by Simon. So when Rita woke up the next morning to pick up the presents from the hastily decorated, that means very hurriedly decorated Christmas tree, which was decorated in a rush, in a hurry. She couldn't find Grandpa and Simon. So, when she was rushing hurriedly, that means she was very furious. She was rushing hurriedly, okay, out of the room to inform her mother. Grandpa walked in unsteadily, that means shaking, okay. Grandpa was walking shakingly from the veranda, and Simon was guiding Grandpa. He was led by Simon. That means Simon was leading Grandpa. Grandpa, you're able to walk again, I exclaimed. How did you do it? Okay, Rita was very excited that her grandpa could walk again. And how did he do it? So, Grandpa said, I needed to get strong again for Simon. Simon says he is not ready to go yet. That means Grandpa was walking for him. Before, Simon has helped Grandpa to live his normal life, to walk again, to go shopping again, even though he couldn't see, okay? Grandpa couldn't see a lot. So Simon helped Grandpa. In this case, Grandpa was helping Simon. So Grandpa said, that Simon told him that he is not ready to go yet. That means Simon is not ready to die yet. So Grandpa was helping Simon to live a normal life after he lost his earsight. Grandpa, you're playing Simon Says again. I said happily. Okay, so Rita was very happy and she told Grandpa that he's playing Simon Says again with his dog Simon, adapted from a story by the same name by Cheryl Rao. Okay, so what do you learn from this story? We learn to be kind to animals. That animals are very kind to us, they help us. Okay, when we are in need of animals, they help us live our normal life. But what happens when animals get sick? We should help animals too, okay? As they helped us, we should be kind to animals as well. Like Grandpa was very kind to Simon. They were best friends. So we learn from the story to be kind to animals. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed this story and you got to learn a very nice value.